A family of 5 vanished in 1992. Then, a locked freezer was found in the attic of their old house. The dust of 3 decades lay thick upon the condemned Monroe house, a shroud undisturbed by time until the demolition crew arrived, their heavy boots echoing a prelude to finality. It was in the forgotten attic, a space sealed by silence and cobwebs, hidden behind a suspiciously newer section of drywall, that they found it, a walk-in freezer, its heavy door not merely closed, but bolted shut from the inside. A collective breath hitched in the grimy air. Bolted from the inside, 30 years after the Monroe family, all 5 of them had vanished from the face of the earth as if plucked by unseen hands, leaving dinner cooling on the table, lights blazing against an empty twilight. The crew foreman, a man hardened by years of dismantling forgotten lives, felt a tremor of unease that had nothing to do with structural integrity. With crowbars and a reluctant, grinding protest of metal, they forced the door, not with a bang, but a sickening, drawn-out screech that seemed to release a sigh from the house itself. The air that billowed out was not of decay, not of death as they might have braced for, but cold, sterile, and utterly empty. Empty, save for 5 pairs of shoes, a man's worn leather work boots, a woman's sensible flats, a teenager's scuffed sneakers, a younger girl's patent leather Mary Janes, and a small child's light-up trainers, their lights long extinguished, arranged in a meticulous, deliberate circle on the freezer's gridded floor. And in the center of that silent, expectant circle, a single VHS tape, its label stark and handwritten, "Watch Alone." The discovery rippled outwards from the condemned property on Elm Street, a shockwave that cracked the veneer of 30 years of unresolved grief and speculation. The Monroe family, Arthur, the quiet, steady father, Eleanor, his gentle wife, known for her roses, Thomas, 17, on the cusp of leaving home, full of restless energy, Clara, 14, with her sketchbook and dreams of art school, and little Samuel, 8 years old, who still believed in monsters under the bed, but never in his own home. They had vanished on a Tuesday in April 1992. No note, no sign of struggle beyond the ordinary chaos of a family evening interrupted. The casserole Eleanor had been making sat half-prepared on the counter. Samuel's homework was spread on the kitchen table, a half-finished drawing of a dinosaur beside it. The television in the living room was tuned to the evening news, its flickering images playing to an absent audience. Their car remained in the driveway, bank accounts untouched. It was as if the earth had simply swallowed them whole, leaving behind only questions that festered into local legend. Now, this cold, empty box, a tomb that held no bodies but radiated a chilling testament. The shoes, heartbreakingly ordinary, each pair a ghost. And the tape, a promise of answers, or perhaps deeper horrors. The air in the attic grew heavier. The dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light from the crew's work lamp seemed to coalesce into whispering forms. Each shoe, a life. Each space between them, an abyss of unknowing. The bolt, engaged from within, screamed of a final, terrifying act of enclosure, a seal placed by a hand that knew its purpose. The foreman, a man named Mac, felt the bile rise in his throat. He'd seen things in his years, forgotten remnants of sad lives, but nothing like this. This wasn't neglect. This was a statement. A cold, calculated, patient horror that had waited 3 decades to be unearthed. He backed away slowly, his gaze fixed on the VHS tape, its simple instruction feeling less like a suggestion and more like a curse. Watch alone. Who would bear that burden? The police were called, the old files dusted off. News crews descended like vultures, their cameras hungry for the grotesque poetry of the scene. The Monroe house, long a whispered landmark of tragedy, was suddenly center stage in a new, even more disturbing act. The quiet street buzzed with a morbid energy, the past clawing its way into the present with icy fingers. The 5 pairs of shoes, standing sentinel in their cold metallic prison, became the focal point of a grief renewed, a mystery sharpened to an unbearable point. The freezer itself, an anachronism, a relic of a time before widespread home refrigeration units of such size, now seemed a purpose-built sarcophagus. Its presence in the attic, concealed behind drywall, spoke of a meticulous effort to hide not just a crime, but the very vessel of that crime. What secrets did it guard, and what terrors would that solitary tape unleash upon the one who dared to obey its command? The house groaned under the weight of renewed attention, its decaying timbers seeming to sigh with a story it had held too long. The silence of 30 years had been broken, not by a whisper, but by the metallic shriek of a forced door, and the stark, undeniable presence of those 5 pairs of shoes waiting. The initial 1992 investigation had been a study in bafflement and frustration. Detective Miles Corbin, then a fresh-faced officer on the force, remembered the Monroe house vividly, the eerie stillness, the half-eaten meal, the lingering scent of Eleanor's lilac perfume mingling with the aroma of baked potatoes growing cold in the oven. It was a scene of abrupt departure, yet devoid of any typical indicators of foul play. No broken windows, no kicked-in doors, no ransacked rooms. The family car, a slightly battered station wagon, sat mutely in the driveway. Neighbors reported nothing unusual. A dog barking down the street, the distant drone of a lawnmower earlier in the day, the mundane soundtrack of suburban life. It was as if the Monroes had simply evaporated mid-sentence, mid-life. Corbin, now Captain Corbin, grayed and weathered by decades of other people's sorrows, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach as he stood once more in the dusty, condemned attic of the Monroe house. The freezer, a hulking white beast, dominated the space, its door ajar, revealing the chilling tableau within: the shoes. He'd seen the crime scene photos from 30 years ago, the table set for 5, the school bags dropped by the door. Now, these shoes, a final, stark representation of each missing soul. The town of Havenwood had never forgotten the Monroes. Their disappearance became a local ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered by parents to errant children. Theories abounded: a secret debt, a sudden religious conversion leading to an unannounced departure, even alien abduction, fueled by the era's fascination with the unexplained. But none of it ever felt right, not to Corbin. There was a precision to their vanishing, an unnatural tidiness that hinted at something more intimate, more sinister. The discovery of the freezer, and particularly the tape, felt like a key turning in a lock he hadn't even known was there. The watch alone instruction was a direct challenge, a piece of bait. After much deliberation and against the protests of some of his younger, more eager officers, Corbin decided he would be the one. He had been there at the beginning. He would see this through. He owed it to the ghosts of Arthur, Eleanor, Thomas, Clara, and Samuel. He owed it to the young officer he once was, haunted by the case that had defined the darker side of his career. The tape was carefully bagged, transported to the station, a relic humming with unspoken dread. In a small, darkened viewing room, with only the whir of the VCR for company, Corbin slid the cassette into the machine. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive silence. He pressed play, snow. Then, a shaky, amateurish image flickered onto the screen. The date stamp in the corner read April 14, 1992. The day before they were reported missing. The quality was poor, the lighting dim, the sound muffled, but it was unmistakably the Monroe house, seen from an unsettlingly intimate perspective. The camera panned across a living room, lingering on Samuel, the youngest, who was engrossed in building a brightly colored tower with plastic bricks. He was humming, a small, contented sound. Then, a voice from behind the camera, distorted slightly by the microphone, but discernibly male and friendly, almost paternal. Corbin leaned forward, his breath caught in his throat. "Hey, Sammy," the voice said, a warm, coaxing tone. "I've got a super secret surprise for you. Something really cool, but it's way up in the attic. Want to come see?" Samuel looked up, his 8-year-old face bright with curiosity. "A surprise? For me?" "Just for you, champ," the voice chuckled. "Come on, it's a new clubhouse. Best one ever." Corbin felt a chill crawl up his spine. The attic, the freezer. The casual, predatory kindness of that voice was more terrifying than any overt threat. He watched, a helpless voyeur separated by 3 decades of time, as Samuel, trusting and innocent, scrambled to his feet, his brick tower tumbling unheeded. "Okay," the boy chirped, his small hand reaching out as if towards the person holding the camera, though the hand never came into frame. The camera moved, following Samuel as he padded out of the living room, his small form heading towards the hallway that Corbin knew led to the attic stairs. The footage became jerkier, the climb evident. Each footfall on the wooden steps echoed in the silent viewing room. "Is it dark up there?" Samuel's small voice asked, a hint of trepidation now. "A little," the voice replied, "but I've got a special light, and the surprise will make it all bright." They reached the attic landing. The camera panned briefly, showing a glimpse of dusty boxes, old furniture draped in sheets, and then, for a horrifying second, the unmistakable gleaming white corner of the newly installed freezer. Incongruous and menacing in the gloom. "Wow," Samuel breathed, his attention seemingly caught by something the camera didn't quite show. "What is it?" "It's your special fort, Sammy," the voice said, softer now, almost a whisper. "Go on, take a look inside. Your adventure starts in there." The camera lurched, as if being set down or passed to someone. Samuel moved forward, a small silhouette against the dim light filtering from the attic window. He hesitated for a moment at the threshold of what Corbin knew was the freezer. Then he stepped inside. The camera angle shifted wildly, a brief, chaotic glimpse of the interior of the freezer, dark, indistinct, and then the heavy thud of a door closing, not a slam, but a solid, final sound. Then, the chilling metallic click of a bolt, Samuel's small, muffled cry, a single, terrified, "Hey," cut short. The tape went black, static hissed. Corbin sat frozen, his hand gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles were white. The sickness churned in his gut. The shoes, Samuel's light-up trainers, one by one. This wasn't a disappearance. This was a slaughter, meticulously planned, cruelly executed, and recorded by the architect of their doom. The friendly voice. Who was it? It had a cadence of familiarity, someone the children would trust implicitly. The casual evil of it was breathtaking. The instruction, "Watch alone," now took on a new, insidious meaning. The killer wanted someone to experience this unfolding horror in isolation, to feel the full weight of their methodical cruelty, to become a solitary witness to their terrible masterpiece. Corbin felt a profound weariness settle over him, the weight of 30 years of questions now solidifying into a monstrous, unbearable truth. And this was only the beginning. There were 4 more pairs of shoes, 4 more souls. The VCR whirred, a mechanical sigh in the oppressive silence of the viewing room as Captain Corbin, his face a mask of grim resolve, cued the next segment of the tape. The screen flickered, and the date stamp remained the same. April 14th, 1992. Hours later, perhaps? The light filtering through the windows in the footage seemed dimmer, the shadows longer. This time, the camera found Clara, 14, sketching intently at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her dark hair fell across her face as she worked, oblivious to the lens. The scene was deceptively normal, the comforting clutter of family life belying the undercurrent of terror that Corbin now felt thrumming beneath its surface. The voice from behind the camera returned, still maintaining that horrifyingly gentle, almost avuncular tone, yet Corbin could now detect a subtle undercurrent, a tightening, a predatory patience. "Clara? Honey?" Clara looked up, a slight annoyance in her artist's focus, momentarily disturbed. "Yeah? Samuel's hiding up in the attic," the voice said, a note of playful conspiracy in its timbre. "He's got this new game he wants to show you. He's waiting for you." Clara frowned, pencil poised above her sketchbook. "The attic? What's he doing up there? Mom said not to play in there. It's dusty." Corbin's gut clenched. The innocent, everyday admonishments of a mother, now imbued with a tragic irony. "Oh, it's okay this time," the voice reassured smoothly. "I helped him set up a little fort. It's pretty neat. He really wants you to see it. He's being very quiet, waiting for his big sister." The manipulation was sickeningly effective. The appeal to her role as an older sister, the implication that Samuel was eagerly anticipating her arrival. Clara, though clearly a thoughtful and perhaps more cautious child than her younger brother, was still a child. She sighed, placing her pencil down. "Okay, fine, but if I get covered in dust, I'm blaming you guys." She pushed her chair back, the sound scraping loudly in the recorded audio. The camera followed her, a silent, stalking eye, as she made her way towards the attic stairs. Her steps were less eager than Samuel's, more measured. She called out, "Sammy, you up there?" No reply, only the echo of her own voice in the stairwell. Corbin could almost feel her unease, a teenage skepticism warring with her sense of duty towards her little brother. "He's probably just trying to surprise you." The voice from behind the camera offered a silken thread of persuasion. "You know how he is." As they ascended, the camera work became slightly more unsteady. Corbin noted, with a surge of cold dread, that the cameraman seemed to be keeping a greater distance from Clara than he had from Samuel, as if anticipating more resistance, or perhaps savoring the chase. Reaching the attic landing, Clara peered into the gloom. "Samuel, this isn't funny." Her voice was sharper now, laced with an undeniable anxiety. The attic appeared cavernous and shadowy on the tape. The white gleam of the freezer was more prominent this time, a stark, unnatural presence in the dusty chaos. "He's in the fort, Clara," the voice urged. "A little closer now. Just in there." Clara approached the freezer slowly, her silhouette framed against its pale door. She reached out a tentative hand, her fingers brushing the cold metal. "Sammy," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Corbin leaned forward, every muscle tensed. He could see her hesitation, the dawning awareness that something was terribly wrong. She put her hand on the large, industrial-looking handle. For a moment Corbin prayed she would turn and run, scream, fight. But the invisible bond of family, the worry for her brother, was a powerful chain. She pulled the heavy door open a few inches. The interior was dark. "Samuel," she called again, louder this time, a definite tremor of fear in her tone. Then, a sudden movement from inside the frame, too quick to fully register, perhaps the cameraman lunging, or something shifting within the freezer itself. Clara gasped, a choked sound of pure terror. The camera tilted downwards abruptly, showing only the dusty attic floorboards for a frantic second, then a flurry of indistinct movement, a muffled scream cut short, a sound like a brief struggle. The heavy thud of the freezer door, more violent this time, the distinct, sharp, metallic sound of the bolt ramming home. Silence. Then, only the ragged breathing of the person holding the camera, a sound that made Corbin's skin crawl. The screen went black. The hiss of static returned, louder this time, more malevolent. Corbin slammed his fist on the table, a single, sharp crack in the stillness of the viewing room. The patent leather Mary Jane's, Clara. The artistic soul, lured by a lie about her brother. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was almost beyond comprehension. Each victim was being drawn into the trap by their love and trust for another member of the family, exploited by this unseen monster who knew their emotional pressure points. The voice. It was becoming clearer to Corbin the more he heard it, There was a familiarity he couldn't quite place, yet it tugged at the edges of his memory, a phantom from the periphery of the original investigation. A friend? A relative? Someone who had offered condolences, perhaps even assisted in the fruitless searches 30 years ago. The thought was a fresh stab of ice in his veins. He pictured the shoes again, arranged in their perfect, mocking circle. Samuel's trainers, Clara's Mary Jane's, 2 down. The methodical nature of the crime, the deliberate recording of it, pointed to a deranged kind of pride, a desire for an audience, even if that audience was a single, horrified individual decades later. The "watch alone" was a command to bear solitary witness to the killer's power, to their absolute control over this doomed family. Corbin felt a wave of nausea. The air in the small room was thick, unbreathable. He fought the urge to stop the tape, to run from the room, from the house, from the suffocating weight of this reawakened nightmare. But he couldn't. He had to see it through. He had to know who. He had to understand the face of the evil that had walked among them, hidden in plain sight, for all those years. With trembling hands, he pressed play again, bracing himself for the next act in this horrifying, videotaped tragedy. The killer was patient, the killer was thorough. And the killer wanted him to see every single, terrible step. The third segment of the tape opened with a slightly different ambiance. The natural light in the Monroe house was fading further, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed like specters in the corners of the rooms captured by the handheld camera. It found Thomas, the eldest son, 17 years old, pacing in the hallway, a frown etched onto his young face. He was taller, broader than his siblings, exuding an air of teenage restlessness that now seemed to Corbin like a coiled spring of anxiety. The voice from behind the camera initiated the exchange, its tone subtly altered again, less overtly playful, more serious, almost conspiratorial. "Thomas, you seen Samuel or Clara?" Thomas stopped pacing, turning towards the unseen speaker. "No. That's what I was wondering. Mom said they were playing, but I haven't heard them in ages. It's getting quiet." Too quiet. His voice was deeper than his brother's, laced with a nascent authority that came with being the oldest. He was already sensing that the familiar rhythms of his home were off-key, discordant. "I think they're up in the attic." The voice offered, a casual suggestion that barely concealed the underlying intent. They were talking about some secret game up there earlier. You know how they get when they're plotting something. Corbin watched Thomas's face. The boy was clearly suspicious. The attic wasn't a usual haunt, and the prolonged silence of his younger siblings was evidently unsettling him. The attic? Why would they be up there for so long? He questioned, his gaze sharp. "Mom's going to be mad if they're making a mess. Maybe you should go check on them." The voice pressed, a subtle manipulation, playing on his protective instincts as the elder brother. "Make sure they're not getting into any trouble. You know, before your mom finds out." Thomas hesitated, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. Corbin could see the internal debate, the desire to dismiss it, to go back to whatever teenage preoccupation had held him, versus the nagging sense that something was amiss. The latter won. "Yeah, all right," he sighed, a hint of resignation in his tone. "But if they've made a disaster zone, I'm not cleaning it up." He started towards the attic stairs, his movements more purposeful, less naive than his younger siblings. The camera followed, maintaining that unnerving, silent pursuit. As Thomas ascended, he called out, "Sam? Clara? You guys up there? Dinner's almost ready." His voice echoed in the stairwell, met only by a heavy, unresponsive silence from above. Corbin felt his own dread deepen. Thomas was not a small child to be easily tricked. He was a young man, strong and likely to resist if he sensed danger. The confrontation, when it came, would be different. Reaching the attic landing, Thomas scanned the gloomy space, his eyes narrowed. The presence of the freezer, now so familiar to Corbin, seemed to immediately draw his attention. It was an anomaly, stark and out of place. "What in the world is that?" he muttered, his voice a low rumble of suspicion as he gestured towards the white monolith. "And where are they?" "They're inside, Tom," the voice said, suddenly closer, the friendly veneer almost entirely gone, replaced by a chilling flatness. They found a new hiding spot. Thomas turned sharply towards the direction of the voice, his body tensing. For the first time, the camera operator seemed to be directly in his line of sight, though still obscured. "Inside that?" Thomas's voice was incredulous, a flicker of fear now evident. "What are you talking about? Open this thing." He strode towards the freezer, his earlier unease blossoming into alarm. He grabbed the handle. Corbin held his breath. This was it. Thomas was strong. He might be able to fight back, to change the horrifying trajectory of this recorded nightmare. He pulled at the door. It didn't budge. Bolted. "What the hell is going on?" Thomas demanded, his voice rising, panic threading through it. He spun around, facing where the camera, and presumably the killer, stood. "Where are my brother and sister? What have you done?" The camera remained steady, an impassive observer. "They're fine, Thomas," the voice said, calm and cold. "They're just waiting for the rest of the family to join the game." "This isn't a game," Thomas shouted, his fear giving way to a surge of protective fury. He lunged, not towards the freezer, but towards the camera, towards his tormentor. The screen dissolved into a chaotic blur of motion. Sounds of a struggle erupted. Grunts, a desperate cry from Thomas, "Get away from me," the sickening thud of impact, a sharp crack. Corbin flinched as if struck himself. The camera clattered to the floor, its lens askew, capturing a distorted view of dusty floorboards and the bottom of the freezer. For several agonizing seconds, only muffled sounds of the struggle could be heard: heavy breathing, a pained groan, the scraping of shoes on wood. Then, a final, choked gasp from Thomas, followed by a heavy, decisive thud, as if a body had fallen. Silence descended again, thick and absolute, broken only by the harsh, ragged breathing of the assailant, amplified by the fallen microphone. After what felt like an eternity, a hand reached into the frame, fumbling for the camera. It righted itself, shaky and unfocused for a moment, then centered again on the freezer door. The door was now slightly ajar. The interior remained dark and unrevealing. The killer's breathing slowly evened out. Then, the familiar, sickening sequence. The heavy door being pulled shut, the decisive, metallic clang of the bolt sliding home. The screen went black. The static hissed, a venomous whisper in the aftermath. Corbin felt a cold sweat bead on his forehead. Thomas, the strong one, the protector, subdued, the scuffed sneakers. He closed his eyes for a moment, the image of those shoes burning behind his eyelids. The violence of this encounter was more overt, more brutal. The killer was not just relying on trickery anymore. They were prepared for resistance, armed, perhaps, and utterly ruthless. Each segment of the tape was an escalation, a descent deeper into the abyss of this person's depravity. The watch alone instruction felt like a shared burden now, Corbin and the killer locked in this macabre communion across time. The killer performing their atrocities and Corbin, the unwilling audience, forced to witness the systematic destruction of a family. Who possessed such intimate knowledge of their routines, their personalities, their vulnerabilities? Who could move through their home with such confident malevolence, turning a place of sanctuary into a slaughterhouse? The voice, that damnable voice, still echoed in his mind, a chilling counterpoint of feigned warmth against the stark reality of the violence. He had to know. He had to see the face behind that voice. He pressed play, his hand surprisingly steady, his resolve hardened into a cold, brittle anger. There were 2 more pairs of shoes, 2 more acts in this private horror show: the mother, Eleanor; the father, Arthur. the architects of this family, about to face the architect of their end. The flickering image returned to the screen, the timestamp indicating that mere minutes had passed since Thomas's struggle. The light in the Monroe house, as seen through the grainy lens of the VHS tape, was now almost entirely artificial, the dim glow of evening having surrendered to the deeper shadows of night. Eleanor Monroe, her face etched with a growing anxiety, was calling out from the bottom of the attic stairs, her voice a thin thread of sound in the oppressive silence of the house. "Thomas? Clara? Sammy, answer me. Where are you, children?" Her calls were laced with an edge of maternal panic, the kind that surfaces when the familiar patterns of family life are inexplicably broken. Corbin watched, his heart heavy, as she began to ascend the stairs, her hand gripping the railing tightly. The camera, positioned at the top of the landing, watched her approach, a predator observing its prey. The voice, when it came, was softer now, almost sympathetic, a cruel mockery of comfort. "Eleanor, they're up here." Eleanor reached the attic landing, her gaze sweeping the cluttered space, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and burgeoning fear. Who is that?" she stammered, peering into the shadows where the camera operator lurked. "Where are my children? What's going on?" "They're safe, Eleanor," the voice said, a lie wrapped in a soothing tone. "They're just playing a new game in the big white box. They wanted to surprise you and Arthur." Her eyes found the freezer, a monstrous white shape in the dim attic light. A flicker of disbelief, then dawning horror, crossed her face. In there? That's not funny. Let them out. Let my children out of there." Her voice rose, cracking with emotion. She took a step towards the freezer, her movements urgent, desperate. "They're fine," the voice repeated, a little firmer now, a hint of impatience creeping in. "But they said you have to see the surprise too. It's for the whole family." Eleanor stopped, her attention torn between the impassive freezer and the unseen speaker. Corbin could see the conflict in her posture, the maternal instinct to rush to her children warring with a primal fear of the unknown, of the voice that was so calm, so horribly in control. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling but resolute. "What do you want?" "I just want us all to be together, Eleanor," the voice replied, and there was something in its cadence, a familiar lilt, that made Corbin's blood run cold. He was close, so close to placing it. Eleanor took another hesitant step towards the freezer. "Let me see them," she pleaded, her voice raw with anguish. "Please, just let me see my children." The camera operator seemed to step aside slightly, gesturing towards the freezer. "Go on, Eleanor." "They're waiting." She approached the freezer, her hands outstretched as if to ward off an invisible blow. Her fingers touched the cold, unyielding metal of the door. She fumbled for the handle, her movements jerky with terror. Corbin watched, a knot of impotent fury tightening in his chest. He knew what was coming. He knew the sequence. Eleanor pulled the door open. The tape didn't show her face, only her back, her shoulders stiffening, then slumping as if under an immense weight. A sound escaped her, a low guttural moan of such profound despair that it seemed to tear through the fabric of the recorded silence. It wasn't a scream of fear but a sound of utter, soul-shattering recognition of loss. She stumbled forward, as if drawn by an irresistible force, and disappeared into the dark maw of the freezer. The camera held on the open doorway for a moment, then, with a deliberate, almost ceremonial slowness, the heavy door was pushed shut. The thud, the bolt, the familiar, sickening finality. The screen went black. Corbin didn't move. He couldn't. The sound of Eleanor's grief-stricken moan echoed in the viewing room, a haunting testament to a mother's worst nightmare made real. Her sensible flats, another pair of shoes accounted for. The killer wasn't just murdering them. He was forcing them to confront the fate of their loved ones, one by one, amplifying their suffering before the end. This was a level of sadism that was profoundly disturbing. The voice, it was there, on the tip of his tongue. Someone who knew Eleanor well enough to call her by her first name with such chilling intimacy. Someone whose presence in the house wouldn't have immediately raised alarm, at least not initially. The fragments were coalescing in Corbin's mind, forming a horrifying, almost unbelievable picture. He remembered the witness statements from 1992. The neighbors, the friends, the relatives. There was one person, a peripheral figure, someone who had been helpful, perhaps too helpful, in the days following the disappearance. Someone who had expressed such profound, believable sorrow. The tape whirred back to life before he could fully grasp the thought. The final act. Arthur Monroe, the father, the head of the household. The camera was waiting for him, perhaps at the foot of the attic stairs, or in the hallway. The house was utterly silent now, a tomb-like stillness that was a stark contrast to the chaotic sounds of a family home it had been just hours before. Arthur appeared, his face a mask of confusion and concern. "Eleanor? Kids? Where is everyone?" he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the empty spaces. The voice from behind the camera answered, devoid of any pretense of warmth now. It was flat, cold, and utterly devoid of emotion. "They're upstairs, Arthur, in the attic. Waiting for you." Arthur's brow furrowed. "The attic? What in God's name is going on here?" He began to move, a sense of urgency in his stride. The camera retreated, leading him, luring him towards the final confrontation. Corbin braced himself. This was it, the culmination of the killer's plan. The moment of truth, however terrible it might be. Arthur Monroe, the unsuspecting patriarch, walking towards his doom, and perhaps towards the revelation of the monster who had orchestrated it all. The worn leather work boots, the last pair, the circle would soon be complete. Arthur Monroe ascended the attic stairs, his heavy work boots thudding with a grim rhythm against the wooden steps, each footfall a drumbeat counting down the final moments of his life, of his family's existence. The camera waited for him at the landing, a silent, malevolent sentinel. The attic was steeped in an almost palpable darkness, the only illumination a harsh, angled beam from what looked like a utility lamp placed deliberately to highlight the monstrous form of the freezer. "Eleanor?" Arthur called out, his voice tight with an anxiety that was rapidly escalating into dread. "Thomas? Kids? This isn't funny anymore." His gaze swept the oppressive gloom, finally landing on the freezer, an alien object in the familiar, dusty landscape of their stored memories and forgotten belongings. And then, he saw the figure standing beside it, partially obscured by shadow, but now making no effort to hide. The camera remained focused on Arthur, capturing his reaction. His body went rigid. His face, already pale with worry, seemed to drain of all remaining color. "You?" Arthur breathed, the word a mixture of disbelief, dawning horror, and a profound, gut-wrenching betrayal. What are you doing? Where are they? Where is my family?" The figure stepped forward slightly, and though the camera angle didn't fully reveal them yet to Corbin, Arthur's reaction spoke volumes. The voice that answered was the same one from the tape, but now, stripped of all pretense, it was laden with a chilling, almost conversational calm that was more terrifying than any shout. "They're all here, Arthur, waiting for you. We're all going to be together. What have you done?" Arthur's voice was a hoarse whisper, his eyes fixed on the figure, then darting to the impassive, sealed door of the freezer. He took a step forward, then another, his movements stiff, wooden. "Let them out. Whatever this is, whatever you think you're doing, just let them out. Let my family go." "Oh, they're not going anywhere, Arthur." The figure chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that held no humor, only a deep, unsettling satisfaction. "And neither are you." "It's time for the family reunion to be complete," Arthur lunged, not with the youthful fury of Thomas, but with the desperate strength of a father and husband pushed beyond the limits of endurance. The camera jerked violently as the figure holding it was clearly engaged. The utility lamp crashed to the floor, plunging the scene into near-total darkness, pierced only by the faint ambient light from a distant attic window. The audio, however, was brutally clear. The sounds of a desperate struggle, grunts of exertion, the sickening thud of fists on flesh, Arthur's roar of fury and despair. "Why?" Arthur screamed, his voice raw with pain and incomprehension. "Why are you doing this to us?" There was a pause in the physical struggle, punctuated by harsh, ragged breathing. Then the killer's voice, close to the microphone now, as if the camera had been dropped or set aside during the fight. "Why? Because you had everything, Arthur, everything I ever wanted. The perfect life, the perfect family. You took her from me, you all did, with your smiles and your happy little charade. You flaunted it. Well, now it's over. Now you'll all be together. Forever, in the dark." Corbin felt a jolt, as if an electric current had passed through him. Her? Who was her? Was this a crime of passion, of twisted jealousy, of a perceived slight magnified by a diseased mind? The struggle resumed, shorter this time. A sickening crack, a choked cry from Arthur, then the heavy final sound of his body collapsing to the wooden floor. Silence, save for the labored, triumphant breathing of the killer. After a long moment, the faint beam of a flashlight beam cut through the darkness, shakily illuminating the scene. The camera was picked up. Its lens found Arthur sprawled motionless on the attic floor near the freezer. The killer then turned the camera for the first time directly upon himself. Corbin gasped. He knew that face. Older now, ravaged by time and perhaps by the madness that had clearly consumed him, but unmistakably Raymond Ray Parker, Eleanor Monroe's estranged younger brother, Uncle Ray. The quiet, often overlooked sibling, the handyman who occasionally helped the Monroes with odd jobs, the one who had seemed so devastated, so lost, in the weeks following their disappearance. He had even helped Corbin and the other officers search the woods, his face a mask of grief. Ray Parker looked directly into the camera, a faint, chilling smile playing on his lips. His eyes, however, were hollow, dead. "Perfect," he whispered, his voice raspy. "All together now." He then turned the camera back towards the freezer. He opened the door. The interior was still dark, but Corbin could hear faint, dragging sounds, the sounds of Ray moving Arthur's body inside. Then, the door thudded shut, the bolt clicked home. Ray Parker then walked over to where the 5 pairs of shoes were presumably already laid out, though not visible in this sequence's beginning. He meticulously picked them up, one by one, and the camera followed his hands as he re-entered the now empty freezer. He placed the shoes in that precise, deliberate circle on the gridded floor. Arthur's work boots, Eleanor's flats, Thomas's sneakers, Clara's Mary Jane's, Samuel's trainers, a grotesque family portrait. Lastly, he placed the VHS tape in the center. He backed out of the freezer, closed the door one final time, and engaged the bolt. The camera was then set down on a box, pointing towards the freezer. Ray Parker stepped back, admiring his handiwork. "Watch alone," he said softly to the camera, a direct address to his future audience. "And remember us." He then walked out of the camera's frame. The tape continued to run for another minute, showing only the silent, sealed freezer in the dusty attic, a monument to his crime. Then, the screen dissolved into static. Corbin sat stunned, the name echoing in his mind. Ray Parker. He had disappeared himself a few months after the Monroes, presumed by many to have succumbed to his grief and wandered off, or met with some unfortunate accident. No one had ever connected him to their vanishing. He was the forgotten man, the grieving relative, the perfect cover, the her he mentioned. It must have been Eleanor. A twisted, possessive obsession with his sister, a resentment of Arthur for taking her, a madness that had festered for years, hidden behind a quiet, unassuming exterior. The entire family wiped out, one, by a hand they had trusted, a face they had known. The sheer, meticulous evil of it, the patient cruelty, the recording of it for posterity, it was beyond anything Corbin had ever encountered. The bolted from the inside mystery was now horribly clear. Ray had either forced Arthur to do it, or more likely, had a way to bolt it externally after staging the interior, making it appear as an internal act to any future discoverer, or, most chillingly, he had simply bolted it from the inside, knowing he had another way out of the attic, the drywall. He must have sealed himself in, then escaped via a pre-planned hidden exit, walling up the evidence of his monstrous deeds. The weight of 30 years of unknowing crashed down on Corbin, replaced by a truth so vile it felt like a physical blow. He thought of the young officer he had been, searching, questioning, never suspecting the monster was walking among them, offering condolences, his hands stained with their blood. The revelation of Ray Parker as the architect of the Monroe family's demise sent a fresh shockwave through the Havenwood Police Department and, soon after, the community that had lived with the open wound of their disappearance for 3 decades. Captain Corbin, aged seemingly by another decade in the few hours he'd spent with that cursed VHS tape, initiated an immediate, high-priority investigation into Parker's life, his whereabouts, his mental state leading up to April 1992. The pieces began to fall into place with horrifying clarity. Ray Parker, Eleanor's younger brother by 5 years, had always been an outsider, a quiet, brooding presence in the otherwise vibrant Monroe family dynamic. He was a skilled handyman, often undertaking minor repairs at their Elm Street home, granting him intimate knowledge of its layout, its vulnerabilities. Neighbors recalled him as odd, reclusive, but harmless. No one had ever suspected the depths of the darkness festering within him. His muttered words on the tape, "You took her from me," pointed to a deeply pathological obsession with Eleanor, a twisted sense of ownership that curdled into murderous rage when confronted with her happy family life with Arthur. The perfect family he sought to destroy was a mirror reflecting his own perceived inadequacies and profound loneliness. The search for Ray Parker himself became paramount. Had he died in the intervening years? Was he living under a new identity, a ghost carrying an unimaginable secret? Records showed he had indeed disappeared approximately 6 months after the Monroes vanished. His small rented apartment was found empty, a few belongings left behind, a brief note suggesting he was going away to find peace. At the time, it was treated as a tragic postscript to the Monroe mystery, another soul lost to the overwhelming grief. Now it was clear it was the calculated exit of a meticulous killer. The freezer itself became a focal point of forensic investigation. It was an older industrial model, likely acquired secondhand. The bolted from the inside aspect was scrutinized. Experts theorized that Ray, with his handyman skills, could have modified the locking mechanism to be operable from the outside while appearing internally secured. Or he had indeed forced Arthur to bolt it before incapacitating him. However, the most chilling and likely scenario, given the discovery of the drywall sealing off that section of the attic, was that Ray Parker had intended the freezer and its contents to remain hidden indefinitely. He had placed the shoes and the tape as a final macabre message, a desperate, narcissistic need for his work to be acknowledged, even if posthumously. He then would have exited the attic through a separate, concealed route, perhaps a hidden panel or a loose section of roofing he'd prepared, before sealing the main access with the new drywall, effectively entombing his crime. The most pressing question now was the location of the bodies. The freezer was empty save for the shoes and the tape. Ray's actions on the tape showed him placing Arthur inside, but this must have been a temporary measure. He couldn't have left them there to decompose in a non-powered freezer without raising immediate suspicion from the smell. He must have moved them. The watch alone instruction on the tape, while a cruel taunt to any future viewer, also hinted that Ray derived some sick satisfaction from the solitary horror he inflicted. Corbin authorized a new intensive search of the Monroe property and surrounding areas, focusing on places Ray Parker was known to frequent, or areas accessible only with his specific skills. His knowledge as a handyman, his familiarity with drainage systems, old wells, and forgotten local spots opened up a terrifying range of possibilities. The original Monroe house, now a condemned crime scene, was painstakingly examined. Every floorboard, every wall cavity, the overgrown garden, the dilapidated shed at the back of the property. The discovery of the tape had provided the who and the how. The why was a glimpse into a diseased mind. But the where were Arthur, Eleanor, Thomas, Clara, and Samuel laid to rest, remained an agonizing open wound. Days turned into weeks. The media frenzy eventually subsided, replaced by a somber, watchful quiet in Havenwood. The community mourned the Monroes anew, this time with the horrifying knowledge of their betrayal by one of their own. The shoes, displayed in evidence photos, became a heartbreaking symbol of the stolen lives. Corbin found himself revisiting the tape, not the visual horrors, but the audio, listening intently to Ray Parker's voice, his intonations, searching for any inflection, any background noise that might offer a clue. Ray's taunt, "And remember us," spoken to the camera after arranging the shoes, felt like a direct challenge. Remember what? Remember where? He had wanted his crime to be discovered, eventually. He had left a breadcrumb trail, however twisted. The investigation into Ray Parker's life prior to 1992 revealed a man increasingly isolated, prone to dark moods, and holding a simmering resentment towards Arthur Monroe, whom he perceived as having stolen Eleanor's affection and loyalty. There were whispers of unsettling comments made years before, dismissed at the time as Ray's typical strangeness. No one had pieced together the mosaic of his madness. The search for Ray, dead or alive, continued across state lines. Old dental records and fingerprints circulated. But he had vanished as completely as his victims, a phantom leaving only a legacy of unimaginable cruelty recorded on a cheap magnetic tape. The focus returned inevitably to the house. If Ray had moved the bodies, he wouldn't have taken them far, not initially. He would have needed a secure, hidden place on or near the property. The thought of the family being buried so close, unknowingly mourned for 30 years while their killer walked free and then faded into obscurity, was a particularly bitter pill for Corbin. He ordered ground-penetrating radar for the yard, a meticulous search of the cellar, which had been previously checked, but perhaps not with this new, horrifying context in mind. The weight of the unseen pressed down on him, the shoes in their circle, the empty freezer, the silent, waiting earth. The house itself felt like a mausoleum, its secrets only partially surrendered. The long, agonizing search for the Monroe family's final resting place stretched through the sweltering summer months, each fruitless dig, each dead end, deepening the frustration and grief that clung to Havenwood like the humid air. Captain Corbin, haunted by the images on the tape and the chilling final words of Ray Parker, found himself walking the perimeter of the Monroe property countless times, trying to see it through the killer's eyes. Where would a man like Ray, meticulous, cunning, and intimately familiar with this land, choose to hide his ultimate crime? The ground-penetrating radar had revealed anomalies in the backyard, near an old, gnarled oak tree that Eleanor had always loved, but excavations yielded only rocks and compacted earth. The cellar, damp and smelling of mildew and time, offered up no secrets despite crews dismantling sections of the crumbling foundation. It was during a late evening review of the original 1992 case files, specifically the initial witness interviews, that a small, overlooked detail snagged Corbin's attention. A neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who had since passed away, had mentioned Ray Parker spending a lot of time in the weeks before the disappearance working on the old, disused well at the very edge of the Monroe property line, a relic from a much older farmstead that had once occupied the land. At the time, it was assumed he was simply securing it, filling it in as a safety measure, a typical handyman task. No one had thought to look inside it once the family vanished. The well, Corbin felt a cold certainty crystallize within him. It was deep, forgotten, easily concealed once capped. A perfect, terrible hiding place. The next morning, a specialized crew was dispatched to the site of the old well. It had been covered with heavy wooden planks, now rotted and overgrown with ivy and weeds, almost invisible unless one knew where to look. It took hours to clear the debris, and then to carefully remove the decaying cap. A powerful winch and camera were lowered into the darkness. The air that rose from the exposed shaft was cold, damp, and carried a faint, earthy scent of profound stillness. On the monitor in the makeshift command post, grainy images resolved into a sight that brought a collective gasp from the assembled officers. Bones, small at first, then larger, intermingled with tattered remnants of fabric. There was no doubt. After 30 agonizing years, the Monroes had been found. The recovery was a somber, meticulous process that took several days. Forensic anthropologists worked with grim precision, carefully exhuming the remains from their earthen tomb. 5 skeletons, confirming the devastating completeness of Ray Parker's crime. The positioning suggested they had been placed there, not merely thrown. Another grotesque tableau by a killer obsessed with control, even in death. Dental records confirmed their identities: Arthur, Eleanor, Thomas, Clara, and little Samuel. The quiet horror of their final resting place, just yards from the home where they had lived and laughed, was almost unbearable. Ray Parker had hidden them in plain sight, beneath the earth they had walked upon, while he played the part of the grieving relative, perhaps even watching the fruitless searches with a secret, perverse satisfaction. The discovery brought a strange, hollow kind of closure. The where was finally answered. The family could now be given a proper burial, a dignity denied to them for 3 decades. But the knowledge of their suffering, the betrayal they endured, and the madness of their killer would forever scar the town of Havenwood. As for Ray Parker, the search for him intensified, but he remained a ghost. Some theorized he had taken his own life shortly after sealing the well and making his escape, unable to live with his horrific secret or fearing eventual discovery. Others believed he was still out there, an old man now, living under an assumed name. The tape, his only confidant, his only link to the monstrous act that defined him. Corbin preferred to believe the former. The thought of Ray Parker living out his days in freedom was an injustice too great to contemplate. The Monroe house, once the demolition crew finished their grim task of respectfully clearing the site of the well, was finally torn down. The land was raised, the earth disturbed and then smoothed over, as if trying to erase the stain of what had happened there. But some stains, Corbin knew, never truly fade. They seep into the soil, into the memory of a place. The 5 pairs of shoes, now catalogued as evidence in a crime that would likely never see a courtroom conviction for its perpetrator, remained locked away, a silent, heartbreaking testament. The VHS tape, its terrible story told, was also secured, a dark artifact of a family's final hours. The town discussed turning the empty lot into a memorial garden, a place for quiet reflection, a small attempt to reclaim the space from the horror that had consumed it. For Captain Corbin, the case of the vanished Monroes, the case that had bookended his career, was finally closed, though its echoes would linger. The watch-alone tape had revealed its secrets, but the solitude of that knowledge, the burden of witnessing such calculated evil, was a weight he would carry for the rest of his days. The mystery was solved, but the sorrow remained, a quiet ache in the heart of Havenwood. A few weeks later, under a sky the color of bruised plums, a funeral service was held for the Monroe family. 5 caskets, side by side, in the Havenwood Cemetery, overlooking the rolling hills they had once known. The entire town, it seemed, had turned out to pay their respects, to mourn the family they had lost twice, once to mystery, and again to a horrifying truth. Captain Corbin stood at the back, a solitary figure in his dark suit, the weight of the years and the case heavy on his shoulders. He watched as flowers were laid, as tears were shed, as eulogies spoke of lives cut tragically short, of love and laughter silenced too soon. There was a rawness to the grief, an edge of disbelief that even now, with the bodies recovered and the killer identified, it was hard to fully comprehend the evil that had befallen them. The why, Ray Parker's twisted obsession and consuming jealousy, offered an explanation, but no real understanding, no solace for the senselessness of it all. After the service, as the crowd began to disperse, Corbin walked slowly towards the 5 fresh graves. He carried no flowers, only the heavy burden of memory. He thought of Samuel's innocent curiosity, Clara's artistic spirit, Thomas's protective strength, Eleanor's gentle nature, Arthur's quiet steadfastness. He thought of the shoes, arranged in that cold, deliberate circle. He thought of the grainy images on the tape, the friendly voice that masked a monstrous intent. A young woman he didn't recognize, perhaps a distant relative he'd never met, approached him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she offered a small, hesitant smile. "Captain Corbin, thank you for not giving up on them." He simply nodded, unable to find words. What could he say? That the truth, when it finally came, was a horror almost worse than the not knowing. That justice for the Monroes felt incomplete with Ray Parker still a phantom. The young woman placed a single white rose on each grave, then turned and walked away, leaving Corbin alone with his thoughts and the silent company of the dead. He stayed until the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and deep violet. The air grew cool. The cemetery was quiet now, save for the rustling of leaves and the gentle breeze. He thought of the watch alone instruction on the tape. Ray Parker had wanted a solitary witness to his depravity, someone to carry the burden of his secret. In a way, Corbin had become that witness, the unwilling keeper of the Monroe family's final, terrible moments. It was a knowledge that would forever isolate a part of him. As he finally turned to leave, he looked back at the 5 graves, now darkening in the twilight. There was a profound sadness, a sense of immense loss, but also, perhaps, a flicker of something else. Resilience, maybe. The resilience of a community that had faced the darkness and chosen to remember, to honor, to mourn. The resilience of the human spirit, which even in the face of unimaginable horror, seeks closure, seeks to find meaning, seeks to heal. The Monroe house was gone. Ray Parker was likely gone too, one way or another. But the story of the Monroes, in its tragedy and its eventual, terrible unveiling, would remain a part of Havenwood's fabric, a somber reminder of the fragility of life, the hidden darkness that can lurk beneath the most ordinary surfaces, and the enduring power of memory. The mystery was solved, the bodies laid to rest. A kind of peace, perhaps, had finally settled over Elm Street. A scarred, wounded peace, but peace nonetheless. The tape, however, would always play in the recesses of Corbin's mind, a chilling, silent film strip of a family's trust betrayed, their lives stolen, one by one. In the suffocating confines of a hidden freezer and a madman's consuming hatred, the circle of shoes, a final, indelible image of love and loss, forever imprinted.